August 25, 1944. Cherbourg Harbor, Normandy, France. The wrench slipped from Sergeant William Henderson's grease-stained hands as he stared at the long, endless convoy forming before him. The British said these trucks would fail. They said the design was flawed, underpowered, and worthless for modern warfare. Now, Henderson watched as 6,000 of them got ready to try the impossible, to supply General Pattons' fast-moving Third Army across 400 miles of destroyed French countryside. The letters GMC stamped on the hood stood for General Motors Corporation. But to the 75% African-American drivers climbing into those cabs, already tired before their journey even began, those letters meant something completely different. They meant survival. They meant the difference between winning and losing. They meant the lifeline that would keep the Allied armies moving toward Germany. What none of them knew that August morning was that this truck, called inadequate by British military experts just 4 years earlier, would turn out to be more valuable than tanks, more crucial than fighters, and more essential than any weapon system in the European theater. The humble 2 and 1 to 2 ton GMC CCKW, called the Jimmy, the Deuce, and a half, was about to make history as the backbone of the most desperate supply operation the world had ever seen. The story does not start in the chaos of war, but in the quiet design rooms of General Motors in 1939. The United States Army Ordnance Corps had given specifications for a new medium tactical truck. They needed a 2 and 1 to 2 ton load-rated vehicle with 6-wheel drive, able to work off-road in any kind of weather. The requirement seemed simple. The solution would prove anything but simple. General Motors Truck and Coach Division, working from their Pontiac, Michigan facility, took on the problem using modified commercial truck parts. They used their existing Axe Series truck design and made important changes. A second rear axle for better traction and load balance, all-wheel drive for off-road use, and stronger frame rails to carry military loads. The result was called ACKW X353, the earlier version of what would later become the CCKW. The first design had a GMC 248 cubic-inch inline 6-cylinder engine making just 77 horsepower. The trucks weighed 9,156 pounds empty and were 264 inches long, 94.5 in wide, and 118 inches tall. By commercial standards, they were good enough. By military standards, they were questionable. France ordered 1,000 of these experimental 6x6 trucks in late 1939. Production started at Yellow Truck and Coach Manufacturing Company's facilities. The trucks had closed steel cabs, fixed bedsides, troop seats, and normal styling that would not have looked strange on civilian construction sites. They were, basically, commercial trucks dressed in military clothing. Then came the disaster that changed everything. German panzer divisions smashed through the Ardennes forest in May 1940, bypassing the Maginot Line and moving deep into France. The French army, even though it had some of the most advanced tanks and fortifications in Europe, collapsed under the speed and teamwork of German combined arms attacks. The British Expeditionary Force retreated to Dunkirk. France fell in just 6 weeks. 2,000 of the ACKW trucks had already been delivered to France. They were captured by German forces and, ironically, would serve the Wehrmacht on the Eastern Front, where German soldiers admitted, though grudgingly, that they were reliable. The remaining trucks, along with others still being built, were sent to Great Britain under emergency wartime contracts. The British Army got the ACKW trucks in summer 1940 and immediately put them through strict testing. British military testers were not impressed. Their reports, kept in military archives, were harsh. The wheelbase was too long for European roads and trails. The trucks were hard to drive in tight spaces. The 77-horsepower engine was too weak for the truck's weight, especially when fully loaded. Acceleration was slow. Hill climbing was just okay. The trucks struggled in mud and soft ground, even with 6-wheel drive. British Army leaders decided the ACKWX was not suitable for modern mechanized warfare. They said the design was basically flawed. Instead of risking British lives by sending these trucks into combat, the War Office made a choice. They sent about 1,000 trucks to the Soviet Union under Lend-Lease agreements in 1941. A total of 2,466 ACKWX trucks were built for all the recipients. The British rejection seemed to prove the worry that American truck makers, used to wide highways and easy terrain, could not make vehicles good enough for European warfare. General Motors engineers, hurt by this opinion, went back to their drawing boards. The lessons from the ACKWX experience were clear. More power was needed. The chassis needed improvements. The wheelbase needed different options for different jobs. But the main idea, a 6x6 medium tactical truck built from commercial parts for fast mass production, stayed strong. American engineers understood something their British colleagues missed. This was not about making the perfect truck. It was about making good enough trucks in large numbers that could overwhelm any enemy with sheer industrial strength. In 1941, General Motors introduced the redesigned version called CCKW. The name came from GMC's internal coding system. C meant designed in 1941. The second C meant conventional cab design. K meant all-wheel drive. U meant dual tandem rear axles. The improvements over the ACKWX were big, but not totally new. The new GMC 270 cubic-inch inline six-cylinder engine replaced the 248, making 104 horsepower at 2,550 revolutions per minute. A 27 horsepower increase might not sound huge, but it changed the truck's performance. The engine gave 216 FTLBs of torque at 1,400 revolutions per minute, giving the low-end power needed for heavy loads and steep hills. Engineers made two wheelbase options. The CCKW 352, with a 145-inch wheelbase, served as a short wheelbase version for artillery prime mover duties. The CCKW 353, with a 164-inch wheelbase, became the normal cargo version. This flexibility let the same basic truck serve many roles across different combat units. The frame was a normal ladder design with riveted cross members, simple to make and fix. 3 beam axles, all driven, gave the 6x6 ability. The front axle used leaf springs. The rear tandem used leaf springs with locating arms to control movement. Brakes were hydraulic with vacuum assist, a big improvement over older mechanical systems. Tires were 750/20, giving good ground clearance and loadability. The first production models kept the closed metal cab from the ACKWX design. But as war production sped up and steel became a limited strategic material, GMC engineers made an important decision. Beginning in July 1943, new CCKW trucks got open cabs with canvas tops and removable doors. This change saved about 150 pounds of steel per truck. Multiply that by hundreds of thousands of trucks, and the steel saved was enough to build dozens of destroyers or hundreds of tanks. The cargo bed also changed over time because of material limits. Early trucks had all-steel beds, which were very heavy. Wooden beds replaced them, but bent and cracked under military loads. A combined design with steel framing and wooden floor slats still did not work well. The final design went back to simple all-steel construction that reduced wasted material while staying strong and durable. What came out of this was a truck that focused on simplicity, reliability, and easy mass production instead of performance. The CCKW would never win races. It would never impress engineers with high-tech features. But it could be built in huge numbers by semi-skilled workers using the materials available. And it could be fixed in the field by mechanics with simple tools and basic training. General Motors gave the main production contract to their yellow truck and coach facility in Pontiac, Michigan. As more orders came in, Chevrolet's St. Louis, Missouri plant joined production. At peak speed, these two factories made one CCKW truck every 7 minutes, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The assembly lines never stopped. The production process itself showed the power of American industry. Raw materials went in one end of the Pontiac plant, and finished trucks came out the other end. Sheet metal was stamped into body panels. Frames were welded and riveted. Engines were built from hundreds of exact parts. Transmissions, axles, and suspension systems were made in other facilities and sent to final assembly. Tens of thousands of workers, many women who had joined the workforce to replace men fighting in the war, ran the operation. Production numbers show the story of American industrial strength. From 1941 through 1945, General Motors made about 562,750 kW trucks in all versions. This number includes special versions but mainly represents standard trucks. Leaving out cab-over-engine trucks and non-all-wheel drive models, standard CCKW production totaled about 518,000 to 519,000 trucks. To put this in perspective, Germany produced approximately 100,000 total trucks. Of all types were built by Germany during the same time. The Soviet Union, even with huge American Lend-Lease help, made fewer than $200,000 trucks. Great Britain's entire wartime truck production was tiny compared to this single American model. The CCKW alone almost equaled the combined truck production of all Axis powers. The CCKW led to dozens of special versions: dump trucks for engineer units, tankers for fuel and water, mobile workshops with lathes and welding tools, communications vans, housing and radio equipment, ambulances with medical supplies and stretcher racks, wrecker trucks with cranes to recover broken vehicles, and anti-aircraft platforms with 450 caliber machine guns. Every version used the same basic chassis, engine, and drivetrain, making maintenance and spare parts easier. But numbers don't matter without use. In June 1944, the CCKW faced its biggest test. The challenge did not come from German anti-tank guns or Luftwaffe bombers. It came from simple physics, the tyranny of distance, and the hard math of supply. On June 6, 1944, over 150,000 Allied soldiers landed on 5 Normandy beaches. The biggest amphibious invasion in history surprised the Germans and created a foothold on Hitler's Atlantic Wall. But a foothold is not victory. By mid-July, more than 1 million Allied troops were packed into a pocket about 50 miles wide and 20 miles deep. They could not move forward. The Germans had turned Normandy into a defensive nightmare. Old hedges, thick walls of earth, and plants that had grown for centuries divided the land into thousands of small fields. Each hedgerow was a ready defensive position. Each field became its own battle. American infantry and tanks fought through this broken land at terrible cost, gaining yards instead of miles. Then came Operation Cobra. On July 25, 1944, American forces launched a huge breakout, helped by intense bombing. Within days, German defensive lines cracked. American armored divisions poured through the gap. By early August, General George Pattons' Third Army was racing across open French countryside, covering 50, 60, sometimes 80 miles per day. The advance threatened to trap and destroy whole German armies. But Patton's tank crews soon faced an enemy more dangerous than any panzer division. They were running out of fuel. Each Sherman tank used about 150 gallons of gasoline per 100 miles of travel. An armored division with about 250 tanks used huge amounts of fuel during the fast advance. Add trucks, jeeps, and other vehicles, and fuel use reached incredible levels. Patton commanded several divisions spread across hundreds of miles of front. His fuel needs alone were over 400,000 gallons every day. The First Army needed similar amounts. British and Canadian forces had their own supply needs. Total Allied fuel use in early August 1944 went over 3 million gallons per day. The Allies had planned for a fast advance. They had supply depots ready and logistics networks set up, but no one expected a breakthrough this big. Within 2 weeks of the Cobra breakout, American spearheads were 200 miles from the Normandy beaches. Within a month, the lead units were almost 350 miles from their supply bases. Every gallon of fuel, every shell, Every can of rations had to travel that far over war-damaged roads through a French transportation network that Allied bombing had destroyed in the months before D-Day. The destruction of French railroads was intentional. To stop German reinforcements from reaching the beaches, Allied air forces had spent April, May, and June 1944 bombing every railroad yard, bridge, and marshalling center within 200 miles of Normandy. The campaign worked perfectly. German panzer divisions took weeks to get to the front instead of days. But those same bombed railroads could not supply Allied armies racing toward Germany. The Mulberry harbors, those amazing artificial ports towed across the English Channel, had supported the invasion force through June and July. But a huge storm in mid-June destroyed the American Mulberry. The British Mulberry at Arromanches kept working, but could not handle the tons of supplies needed for 2 full army groups. Cherbourg had been captured, but its port facilities were so badly damaged by German engineers that repairs would take months. In late August 1944, American commanders faced disaster. Pattons tanks were running out of fuel 300 miles from their supply bases. The First Army was rationing ammunition. Combat ability was hanging by a thread. Without fast, massive resupply, the Allied advance would stop. German forces would get time to build new defensive lines. The chance to end the war in 1944 would be lost. On August 21, 1944, American logistics officers held an emergency planning meeting. 36 hours of non-stop meetings produced a solution so desperate, so bold, that it could only have been thought of by Americans used to transcontinental highways and huge trucking networks. They would make a special express convoy system like priority freight trains. Every available truck would be used without stopping. 2 one-way routes would be made from Normandy to forward supply points. All civilian traffic would be banned. Military police would control every intersection to make sure convoys never stopped. The plan needed more trucks than any single command had. Within hours, logistics officers began taking trucks from every non-critical unit in the European theater. Artillery battalions gave up their prime movers. Engineer units gave up construction trucks. Medical companies released ambulances. Infantry divisions lost their own transportation. Every truck that could roll became part of the operation. The main vehicle was the GMC CCKW. By August 1944, tens of thousands of these trucks had arrived in Europe. They were sitting in motor pools, parked at supply depots, and scattered across the rear areas. Now they were gathered for the biggest truck convoy in history. 6,000 vehicles were assembled. Later, that number would reach nearly 6,000 trucks, actually moving on the road at the same time. But trucks need drivers, and here American racism created both a crisis and an opportunity. The United States Army in 1944 was still fully segregated. African American soldiers served in separate units under mostly white officers. Military rules based on racist ideas said black soldiers did not have the intelligence or courage for combat roles. So, African Americans were mostly put in service units, quartermaster companies, port battalions, transportation units, and as truck drivers. In August 1944, the European theater had about 210,000 African American soldiers. Almost half, about 93,000, served in the Quartermaster Corps. When the call went out for truck drivers, these men answered, not because they wanted to drive trucks for 60 hours straight, not because they liked being segregated and treated unfairly while fighting for freedom abroad. They answered because their country needed them, because combat troops depended on them, because African American soldiers knew that serving well would help the fight for civil rights at home. 17,000 African American soldiers became Red Ball Express drivers. 3,000 additional white soldiers joined them, though in practice the operation stayed mostly segregated, with black and white units running separate convoys. The drivers were between 18 and 40 years old, though most were under 24. Many had never driven a truck before joining the military. Some came from cities where nobody owned cars. They got quick training, sometimes just a few days, before being declared ready to drive 2 and 1 2-ton military trucks carrying 5 tons of cargo through combat zones. The African-American soldiers who became Red Ball Express drivers came from every part of the United States. Farm boys from Mississippi, who had driven tractors but never trucks. Factory workers from Detroit, who knew assembly lines but not military logistics. College students whose studies were interrupted by the draft. Sharecroppers' sons looking for better opportunities than the Jim Crow South offered. Men who had faced discrimination all their lives now were trusted with the most important supply mission of the war. The Red Ball Express began operation on August 25, 1944. Dutch's name came from railroad terms dating back to the late 1800s. Railroad companies marked priority. Express freight cars with red balls, telling all other traffic to give way. Now red balls were on signs marking special truck routes across France. Red balls were also painted on truck hoods to show convoy vehicles. Red Ball Express. The system was very simple but brilliant. 2 parallel one-way routes connected Normandy ports to forward supply depots. The northern route carried loaded trucks toward the front. The southern route brought empty trucks back to Normandy, often carrying German prisoners west as backhaul cargo. The total route length eventually stretched nearly 400 miles as the front moved east. Convoys officially had at least 5 trucks with jeep escorts in front and back. Trucks were told to keep 60-yard gaps and a 25 mph maximum speed. In reality, trucks often left as soon as they were loaded without waiting to form a convoy. Speed limits became more like suggestions than rules. Drivers removed or turned off engine governors, pushing the CCKW trucks well over their 56 mph for maximum design. Some veterans said speeds went over 60 mph, a terrifying speed in a 212-ton truck with 1940s suspension and brakes. The 793rd Military Police Battalion provided route security and traffic control. MPs manned every major intersection, ensuring Red Ball convoys never stopped for cross-traffic. They guided lost drivers, reported accidents, and tried to enforce speed limits, though it was almost impossible. Some MPs even rode with convoys when their jeeps were too slow to keep up with speeding trucks. Each round trip took about 54 hours as the front moved farther east. 2-man driver teams shared duties, though in reality, both men often stayed awake for the whole trip. The trucks carried everything forward. 5-gallon jerry cans of gasoline, ammunition in wooden crates, food rations in cardboard boxes, medical supplies, spare parts, mail from home, and sometimes unofficial cargo, including black market items and personal packages. Loading at Cherbourg and other Normandy ports ran 24 hours a day. Stevedores, many of them also African-American, worked with brutal efficiency. A CCKW could be loaded with 5 tons of cargo in less than 10 minutes. Drivers signed for their loads, got route instructions, and rolled toward the front. No rest stops, no delays. Keep them moving. The journey itself was dangerous and would break modern safety rules in many ways. Drivers drove in blackout conditions at night using tiny cat-eye blackout lights that gave almost no light. They navigated by memory, following the truck in front using only instinct. Roads were often cratered from bombing or shelling. Bridges were damaged. Detours had no signs. Getting lost meant wasting fuel and delaying critical supplies. German air attacks, though rarer by late summer 1944, were still a threat. The Luftwaffe could still launch raids, and a convoy of trucks was an easy target. Drivers learned to watch the sky, listen for the sound of German engines, and scatter off roads when air raid warnings sounded. Some trucks had 50-caliber machine guns on ring mounts above the passenger seat. These guns gave more reassurance than real defense. Landmines were a constant danger. German forces put mines in road shoulders and likely parking areas. Some were advanced triggered devices. Others were crude, buried shells or captured bombs wired to explode under a vehicle. Red Ball drivers learned to stay on pavement, park only in cleared areas, and watch for disturbed earth or suspicious objects. Fatigue was the worst enemy. Men pushed themselves past human limits, kept going with coffee and determination. Some drivers took benzodrine tablets, amphetamines given by medical officers to fight exhaustion, though this was officially discouraged. The drugs kept men awake but hurt judgment, leading to accidents. Many drivers relied instead on strong coffee, cigarettes, and sheer willpower to stay alert during these long trips. Accidents were common. Trucks crashed into each other or obstacles, overturned, or ran off roads in the dark. Some accidents were fatal. The Army assigned relief drivers to ride in passenger seats, taking over when the main drivers could no longer drive safely. Even so, exhaustion caused many problems. The trucks themselves suffered badly. The CCKW was made for military use, but running non-stop without proper maintenance went beyond any design limits. Engines overheated in summer heat while hauling full loads at high speed. Transmissions failed from overuse. Clutches burned out. Brakes wore down in days instead of months. Tires carrying too much weight at high speed on rough roads often failed. Maintenance had to be done under impossible conditions. Mechanics worked by roadsides, in fields, under tarps strung between trucks. They had only basic tools and whatever spare parts were available. Many repairs were makeshift, just enough to get the truck moving again, not proper rebuilds. Oil changes were skipped. Scheduled maintenance was ignored. Everything was done to keep trucks moving. Mechanics became masters of improvisation. They made gaskets from scavenged materials. They bypassed broken parts with jury-rigged solutions. They took parts from one truck to fix another. The simple CCKW design made this possible. A mechanic with basic skills could find problems, figure out needed parts, and make repairs using whatever materials were on hand. This flexibility, born from desperate necessity, became one of the truck's greatest strengths. By late August, broken trucks were everywhere along the Red Ball routes. Some estimates say over 80 vehicles were just abandoned when they could not be quickly fixed. Drivers took any parts they could carry and hitched rides on passing convoys. Wrecker trucks worked non-stop to recover broken vehicles, but often they too broke down under the heavy strain. At one point, nearly 30% of Red Ball trucks had serious mechanical problems that should have taken them out of service, but they kept rolling anyway because stopping was not an option. Yet, the operation worked beyond everyone's expectations. Within 5 days of starting, the Red Ball Express reached peak capacity. On August 29, 1944, 132 truck companies operating 5,958 vehicles delivered 12,342 tons of supplies to forward depots. This single day of work beat every pre-war estimate of what was possible logistically. The numbers kept growing. Daily deliveries averaged between 10,000 and 12,500 tons. 900 trucks were on the road at any one time. Over 82 days of operation, Red Ball Express drivers moved 412,193 tons of supplies across France. They drove 121 million ton miles, a number that multiplies the weight of supplies by the distance traveled. They kept multiple army groups supplied during the fastest advance in military history. Private James Rucard of the 514th Quartermaster Regiment later remembered the experience. We hauled anything General Pattons needed: gasoline, ammunition, food, medical supplies. We took it all the way to the front lines. Back and forth, back and forth. Some drivers ran into ambushes. My company was lucky, but there was shooting all around us. We had to watch for V-1 buzz bombs. They would fly over and then drop like regular bombs. My worst memories were seeing trucks blown up and being afraid I might get killed. But when General Pattons said, "Be there," you were there, even if you had to drive all day and all night. Rucard's words show the reality of Red Ball operations. The constant fear, the exhaustion that made every mile feel like 10, the pride in knowing their work mattered, the determination to keep going no matter what. His company ran from Cherbourg to forward depots dozens of times during the 82-day operation. They lost trucks to accidents, mechanical problems, and occasional enemy attacks, but they never failed to deliver their cargo. Corporal Washington Rector of the 39th 16 Sats. City Teen Quartermaster, Truck Company, explained the racial issues. You accepted discrimination. We were told not to socialize with white drivers for fear problems would happen. Some white drivers tried to stop black drivers from passing their convoys, creating dangerous road conditions. But most white combat troops appreciated us. They knew we were risking our lives to get them what they needed. Rector's story showed the complicated racial tensions that existed in the Red Ball Express itself. Black and white units often worked separately. When they did meet, discrimination sometimes appeared in small ways. White MPs might stop black drivers more often. White mess halls might serve black drivers last. White drivers might refuse to help black drivers with truck problems. Yet, on the roads, when German shells fell or when a truck broke down far from help, race often mattered less than survival. Black and white drivers sometimes helped each other despite official segregation rules. The trucks themselves became legendary with the drivers. The CCKW could take amazing abuse. You could overload them, push them past speed limits, skip maintenance, and they kept running. Sure, they broke down a lot. The transmissions were weak. The brakes wore out fast, but you could fix them with basic tools. That's what mattered. A complicated truck that needed a factory to fix would have been useless. The Jimmy was simple. Simple meant it worked. Drivers learned their trucks very well. They learned the sound of every part, knowing when something was about to fail. They knew how hard they could push before causing a serious breakdown. They understood which problems could wait and which needed attention right away. This deep knowledge came from spending days and nights behind the wheel, doing their own repairs and pushing the trucks to the limits and beyond. By September 1944, the Red Ball Express was delivering supplies to depots 350 miles from Normandy. The logistics became more complicated. Longer distances meant fewer tons delivered per truck each day. More trucks broke down from longer trips. Driver fatigue became a big problem. The French railroad system, which Allied engineers worked hard to fix, was still mostly unusable. New ports, especially Antwerp in Belgium, were still controlled by Germans or too damaged to use. The stress showed in every part of the operation. Accident rates went up. Some convoys were attacked by leftover German units still fighting in isolated areas. Theft became a problem as valuable cargo disappeared from trucks parked at rest stops. Gasoline, cigarettes, and food rations ended up on black markets in liberated French cities. Some stolen goods showed up on black markets in Paris and other cities. Drivers and cargo handlers faced accusations, often not true, which added to racial tensions. Military police investigated many incidents, but rarely recovered stolen materials. Yet, the trucks kept moving because stopping was not an option. General Pattons' Third Army, the lead of the Allied advance, used supplies faster than any military force in history. His tank crews were in almost constant combat, using ammunition at rates that shocked supply officers. Each tank fight could use a full combat load, needing immediate resupply. Patton's aggressive tactics worked, destroying German divisions and taking territory, but only because the Red Ball Express kept his troops fueled and armed. Patton himself knew how important the operation was. Even though famous for bold tank attacks, he understood that logistics made everything possible. His tanks were useless without fuel, his artillery silent without shells, his infantry powerless without food and ammunition. The Red Ball Express made his fast advance possible. Without it, the Third Army would have stopped within weeks of the breakout, giving German forces time to set up new defensive lines that could have prolonged the war for months or years. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, also recognized how important the operation was. In an October message to Red Ball Express workers, he wrote, "To you drivers and mechanics, and your officers who keep the Red Ball vehicles constantly moving, I wish to express my deep appreciation. You are doing an excellent job." Eisenhower understood military logistics better than most commanders. His experience planning Operation Torch in North Africa had taught him that supply determined what operations were possible. No amount of tactical skill could make up for bad logistics. The Red Ball Express showed logistics at its most basic and most important. Trucks, drivers, roads, nothing fancy, nothing glamorous, but absolutely essential. Eisenhower's public praise of the drivers was unusual for that time and showed his real appreciation for unglamorous but vital work. The difference with German logistics was clear and very telling. The Wehrmacht, even though it had a modern mechanized army, still depended a lot on horse-drawn transport. Germany used more than 2.8 million horses during World War II to move supplies and equipment. German truck production was limited by shortages of steel, fuel problems, and factories focused on making weapons. When German mechanized units moved forward, they often went faster than their supply lines, a problem that helped cause defeats in Russia and North Africa. German forces in France in 1944 faced a logistics nightmare. Allied air control made daytime movement almost impossible. French resistance fighters sabotaged railroads and attacked supply convoys. The Wehrmacht's horse-drawn supply system, fine for fixed defensive battles, could not keep up with fast-moving warfare. German units often fought with not enough ammunition, poor food supplies, and constant fuel shortages. Captured German soldiers told interrogators that American logistics superiority was as discouraging as American firepower superiority. By mid-November 1944, the strategic situation had improved enough to allow the Red Ball Express to stand down. Antwerp's port facilities were finally cleared of German demolitions and opened to Allied shipping. The shorter supply route from Antwerp to the front cut trucking distances a lot. French railroads, fixed by American and British engineers, began working on limited schedules. Portable gasoline pipelines laid across France started delivering fuel straight to forward depots. On November 16, 1944, the Red Ball Express officially ended after 82 days. The drivers, many more tired than they had ever been in their lives, returned to their original units. Some joined other supply operations. Others transferred to combat roles as the Army, desperate for infantry, started accepting African-American volunteers for frontline service. The final numbers told a story of great achievement still studied by military planners. 412,193 tons delivered, 6,000 trucks at peak operation, 23,000 drivers and support personnel, 75% African-American, with an average of 900 trucks on the road at the same time. Distances covered up to 400 miles one way, running continuously for 82 days without stopping. But the real story was the truck. The GMC CCKW, rejected by British experts as not good enough, proved to be the most valuable tactical vehicle of World War II. Its simplicity, the very thing that made it seem weak, was its greatest strength. Drivers could repair CCKWs with basic tools. Mechanics could keep them running with improvised parts. The trucks could be abused, overloaded, and neglected. Yet they kept working. The CCKW's reliability under abuse became famous. Stories spread of trucks running with cracked engine blocks held together by wire and determination, of transmissions that should have broken, still shifting gears through pure mechanical stubbornness, of trucks that arrived at depots with flat tires, overheated engines, and failing brakes, delivered their cargo, got quick repairs, and rolled out again hours later. The truck's simple, strong design meant that even badly damaged vehicles could often make it to their destination. General Pattons said clearly that the 2 and 1 to 2 ton truck is our most valuable weapon. He understood what many civilians did not. Without supply, armies become mobs. Tanks without fuel are useless. Rifles without ammunition are just clubs. The most advanced weapons are worthless if they cannot be kept supplied. The humble CCKW truck made modern mechanized warfare possible by solving the boring but critical problem of moving supplies. Colonel John Eisenhower, the Supreme Commander's son, and a veteran logistics officer, wrote after the war that without the Red Ball truck drivers, the advance across France could not have happened. The trucks, especially the GMC CCKW, let American forces keep moving when any pause would have let German defenses get stronger. The war might have lasted into 1946 without this logistic success. In December 1944, the system faced its final test. German forces launched Operation Watch on the Rhine, the Ardennes Offensive, better known as the Battle of the Bulge. Hitler's last major attack in the West surprised American forces, creating a dangerous bulge in Allied lines. The situation needed fast, massive reinforcements and resupply. The Red Ball Express had officially ended, but the trucks were not done, and neither were the drivers. Reorganized under new names, including the Little Red Ball, the White Ball Express, and others, convoy operations started again. The same GMC CCKWs that supplied Pattons' advance now rushed reinforcements to stop the German breakthrough. The same African-American drivers who had proved themselves in summer returned to the roads in winter conditions that made August's problems look easy. Snow and ice covered French and Belgian roads. Driving in blackout conditions became even more dangerous. German air attacks increased as the Luftwaffe threw its reserves into supporting the offensive. Yet the trucks kept rolling. Ammunition reached surrounded American units. Fuel kept tanks and trucks moving. Reinforcements arrived to close the Bulge's flanks. The Battle of the Bulge was won by combat troops fighting desperately, but it was supported by truck drivers who kept supply lines open in the worst winter weather Europe had seen in decades. Winter operations brought new problems. Engines froze overnight and had to be thawed before they could start. Ice on the roads made speed limits useless because trucks slid no matter how skilled the driver was. Snow drifts blocked routes, taking hours of digging to clear paths. Frostbite was a constant danger for drivers in open cab trucks with very little heat. Yet the supply convoys kept going, proving that the logistics system created during the Red Ball Express could work in any conditions. After Germany surrendered in May 1945, the CKW trucks continued to serve. Trucks that had crossed France in 1944 were now in Germany. They carried displaced people to refugee camps. They distributed food to starving civilians. They moved occupation troops across the defeated Reich. Some were sent to the Pacific Theater, serving in the Philippines and Okinawa campaigns. Production continued until 1945. By the end of the war, General Motors had built more CCKW trucks than Germany had built vehicles of all types combined. Total production, about 562,750 units, was more than the entire pre-war truck inventory of most nations. These trucks did not serve just America, but were supplied to Allied forces worldwide through Lend-Lease. British, French, Soviet, and Canadian armies all used GMC CCKWs. The truck's simple design gave it amazing longevity. CCKWs stayed in active American military service through the 1960s. The design was replaced by the M35 series trucks in the 1950s, but older CCKWs continued in National Guard and Reserve units for years after. Many were sold as surplus to foreign militaries, where they served into the 1970s and 1980s. Some still work today in the hands of collectors and museums. The Red Ball Express drivers, especially the African-American majority, were recognized slowly and not fully. The operation was publicized during the war in newsreels and magazine articles, but the racial part of the story was often ignored or downplayed in media for segregated American audiences. The 1952 film Red Ball Express, while showing African-American participation, was changed at the Department of Defense's insistence to show racial integration that did not exist in 1944. Many Red Ball veterans returned to an America still deeply segregated. Men who had risked their lives supplying the fight against fascism faced discrimination in housing, jobs, and civil rights. Some used GI Bill benefits to get education and home loans, though even these benefits were often harder to get for African Americans. Banks refused loans, universities set quotas, employers passed over qualified black veterans in favor of white applicants. Others found their military service ignored or forgotten. But the story lived on. In the 1980s and 1990s, historians began fuller studies of Red Ball Express operations. Veteran stories were recorded and preserved. Museums created exhibits showing the convoy system and the soldiers who made it work. The National World War II Museum in New Orleans has many Red Ball Express materials, including restored GMC CCKW trucks and personal accounts from drivers. James Ruckard, who served with the 514th 14th Quartermaster Regiment, told reporters years later, "I'm proud I served. We were young. We were scared. But we did what needed doing. A lot of white folks didn't think black soldiers could handle responsibility. We proved them wrong. Every supply run that reached the front line on time, that was us proving we deserved respect. That was us fighting for freedom, both foreign and at home." Ruckard's words showed the double reality of African-American World War II veterans. They fought for American victory while knowing America denied them full citizenship. They risked their lives for a country that segregated them, discriminated against them, and often refused to recognize their contributions. Yet they served with honor, understanding that their work under fire helped the bigger fight for civil rights. The Red Ball Express became another chapter in the long story of African Americans proving their worth to a skeptical nation. The technical lessons from Red Ball Express operations shaped American military logistics for decades. The idea of continuous supply convoys, dedicated routes with priority traffic control, and massive trucking operations became standard practice. During the Korean War, similar convoy systems supplied United Nations forces in Vietnam. Even with different terrain and battles, truck convoys remained key to American operations. Modern military logistics still studies Red Ball Express planning and execution. The GMC CCKW design influenced post-war truck development worldwide. Its 6x6 setup became standard for medium military trucks everywhere. The idea of using mass-produced, easy-to-fix vehicles instead of specialized military designs became standard practice. Countries around the world copied or adapted CCKW features in their own Army truck programs. Soviet designers who got thousands of CCKWs through Lend-Lease studied the trucks closely. Post-war Soviet military trucks, including the ZL series, clearly showed CCKW influence in layout and capability. The Soviets realized that the CCKW's best feature was not any single technical detail, but the whole package. Good enough performance, simple maintenance, and large numbers available. Modern military vehicles are much more advanced than the CCKW. They have computers, automatic transmissions, central tire inflation, and armor. But they still face the same main problem: how to move supplies reliably in combat while staying simple enough for field repairs. Every military truck designer since 1945 has worked under the shadow of the CCKW, trying to match its mix of ability and simplicity. The CCKW showed that the best military equipment is not always about having the top specifications. The British were right that the ACKWX was underpowered and hard to handle. But they were wrong about what really mattered. In total war, enough. Good enough vehicles made in huge numbers beat superior vehicles made in small numbers. Trucks that mechanics can fix with basic tools work better than trucks that need special equipment and factories. Simple can be smart. The British Army, which rejected the ACKWX in 1940, later used thousands of CCKWs through Lend-Lease. British drivers grew to value the same things their evaluators had criticized. The long wheelbase that seemed awkward on narrow European roads gave excellent stability for heavy loads. The engine that seemed too weak was actually strong enough and very reliable. The simple design let British mechanics trained on complex vehicles keep CCKWs running with whatever tools and parts were available. A British transport officer wrote in his report that the American trucks, first dismissed as crude, proved better in long operations than British trucks that needed more complicated maintenance. The CCKW's ability to keep running, even when neglected or abused, made it perfect for the chaos of combat supply work. British units learned to prefer CCKWs over their own trucks for long trips under hard conditions. The story of the GMC CCKW and the Red Ball Express is really a story about what actually wins wars. Not the newest technology, not the most impressive specifications, not the vehicles that look best in pictures or official demonstrations. What wins wars is reliable equipment made in large numbers to overwhelm the enemy, driven by determined people who know their mission really matters. The CCKW was not the best truck in World War II. It was just adequate, but adequate trucks in the hundreds of thousands, driven by men willing to work until they collapsed, supplied the most successful military campaign in history. The simple 2 and 1 to 2 ton truck, dismissed as worthless by British experts in 1940, became the lifeline that kept Allied armies moving from Normandy to the Elbe River. And the drivers, 75% of them African-American soldiers, fighting for a country that still denied them basic civil rights, showed that excellence has no racial boundary. They kept the trucks rolling when even a short pause could mean American soldiers might run out of ammo or fuel. They drove through exhaustion, through fear, through racism and discrimination, because the mission was more important than personal comfort or recognition. These men returned home to a nation that still did not fully recognize their humanity. Many faced the same unfair treatment they had known before the war. But they proved something important. They showed that African-American soldiers could handle complicated and critical missions under the hardest conditions. They proved that segregation was a lie, and that ability and determination had nothing to do with skin color. The Red Ball Express became part of the proof that would later help end Jim Crow segregation in the decades after the war. On August 25, 1944, Sergeant William Henderson finished tightening the last bolt on a CCKW engine and watched the truck roll out to join the convoy. The British had said these trucks were worthless. Henderson knew better. He knew that in the next 82 days, these supposedly inadequate vehicles would make history. Not by dramatic combat or fancy technology, but by simple, stubborn, hard, unglamorous work. Hauling supplies, keeping armies moving, helping win the war. The GMC CCKW, the Jimmy, the Deuce and a half, the truck. The British rejected the vehicle that became America's secret weapon. The lifeline of the Red Ball Express. Proof that sometimes the most important things are the simplest, operated by people determined to get the job done no matter what it took.